Since you've married into the Shaw family, you will have to follow the Shaw family rules." Suddenly, my mother-in-law said this to me. "Huh? Okay." I responded, bewildered. "My name is Margaret. I'm 28 years old. As a sommelier, I worked as a liquor buyer for a department store. At 27, I met, dated, and married my now husband Sawyer, a winemaker. I was deeply moved by my husband's passion for winemaking. I was also excited about the winemaking process. My husband told me he learned a lot from me about tasting and selling wine. We were truly in love. Before we got married, my husband told me, because of work, we'll be living with my parents. As a buyer, I knew I had good social skills, and I thought I could get along with anyone, so I agreed. Looking back now, I can only say I was naive. You must not eat sourdough bread. My mother-in-law sternly warned me about this. It seems that if the yeast from the bread gets in, the wine will be ruined. I understood that. The strange part came afterward. You must not walk in front of your husband. Walk 3 steps behind your husband. You must not walk in front of your mother-in-law either. Walk 5 steps behind me. What? I was puzzled by this. It's only natural considering this is the home of a distinguished winemaker. I have done the same myself. She laughed through her nose. Do not walk in the same line as us. Walk 5 steps behind. She pointed backward with her chin. The busiest time for a winemaker is during winter. This is because the brewing of wine, which uses grapes, is usually done during the winter. During that time, my husband stays at the winery and doesn't come home. Then my mother-in-law said something even stranger. When your husband is away, you, the daughter-in-law, should eat only plain food. With a thud, she placed a bowl of porridge in front of me. Today's meal was salad, grilled chicken, and vegetable soup, right? That's fine for me and my son. But as a daughter-in-law, who was taken in by this family, you must mix all the leftovers with chicken stock to make porridge. You should only eat simple food and ensure leftovers don't leave our home. That is the duty of a daughter-in-law and the teaching of our family. I have done the same myself. Upon closer inspection, there was spinach from the salad and chicken skin from the grilled chicken in the porridge. Yet cooking was my job. Even though I didn't have the right to eat it, I was forced to cook breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And my meal was porridge made from vegetable peels and cabbage cores. My mother-in-law and father-in-law silently ate the dishes I made while I ate porridge. Days passed without any conversation. When the winemaking season ended and my husband returned home in the spring, I was allowed to have normal meals again. That's the tradition for a daughter-in-law taken into the family. I've done the same myself, she said. In spring, summer, and fall, I can eat relatively what I want. But in winter, it's porridge. Winter has come again this year. I was feeling down that December. My mother from back home came to visit for the first time. How have you been? She stayed at a nearby hotel and came to visit for a day. Seeing her face made me feel relieved somehow. Let me treat you to some cake. I read in a guidebook about a place with beautiful and delicious Mont Blanc cakes, she said excitedly as we headed to the cake shop together. Suddenly, my mother turned around. Hey, why aren't you walking beside me? Because I had gotten into the habit of walking 5 steps behind. I can't walk beside you. I can't. I slowly began to talk about the rules at my husband's house. What does this mean? As she listened, my mother started to tremble, and wrinkles began to form on her forehead, making it clear she was getting angry. I understand. Margaret, you've done well enduring all this. You're a strong girl. Then she said, Come on, let's have some Mont Blanc cake. Sweet things for energy. Even in her 60s, my mom kept up with younger people by using Instagram. She took a picture of the cake and took a big bite. Delicious. We must come here again next time I visit. She laughed as she said that. Seeing her smile made me feel a bit stronger, too. 8 months later, I became pregnant and gave birth. I had been staying at the maternity hospital for a week, but it was finally time to return home. I had actually wanted to go back to my parents' home for the birth, but my husband had said, "My mom will be there, so it should be fine. Above all, I really want to be with the baby as soon as possible. Once winter comes, I won't be able to come home again." I also wanted to respond to my husband's wish. Winter is near. When that time comes, you'll have to stay at the winery and won't be able to see the baby. With that in mind, I wanted to let my husband spend a little time with this sweet little life, but it also meant seeing his mother again. That's tough. My steps were heavy as I returned from the maternity hospital. As soon as we got home, plans were made to introduce the baby to the relatives over the weekend. The incident happened on the very day the relatives gathered. A festive meal had been arranged. At lunchtime, the relatives gather in groups. As I was carrying the arranged meal to the guest room, my mother-in-law called me into the kitchen with a, "Hey, what is this?" She opened the refrigerator, showing me a package. "A treat for yourself? You've been in this house for several years now, and you still don't know your place." What my mother-in-law was holding was a half-pound of prime-grade beef. She suddenly threw the package of beef into the garbage bin. There was a rustling sound of plastic. Then she yelled loudly, "Prime-grade beef is too good for you. Just eat leftovers as usual. Know your place as a taken-in daughter-in-law." But I timidly said, "That isn't mine." "What?" She frowned. It would soon be revealed whose it was. At noon, the relatives gathered around the baby and ate the celebratory meal. They all said things like, "Thank you for your hard work," and "Congratulations on the baby's birth." During the gathering, someone called out to me from a distance, "Margaret?" It was my mother. She called out while talking to a relative seating farthest from her, causing everyone to notice. "Sorry, I knew what was in the celebratory meal beforehand, but you know I'm allergic to fish, right?" I blinked in surprise. Is my mom allergic to fish? I've never heard that before. But my mother continued, "That's why I put the prime-grade beef in the fridge. I want to eat that instead, so please bring it out." As I hesitated, my mother-in-law burst out, "I'm sorry. We're currently out of prime-grade beef." "Out of it? What do you mean? This isn't a store. I put it in the fridge this morning. I was hoping Margaret would cook it for me. I can't eat the fish, you know." Wow, Mom. She's truly a force to be reckoned with. She didn't just listen to my complaints at the cake shop. She had been planning her counterattack since then. I love you, Mom. I love you so much. Watching from the side, I felt a rush of satisfaction. I put it in there today, didn't I? Why isn't it there? Hey, why? My mother persistently asked. "Well, that's, I could see my mother-in-law sweating even from the back of her head. "So let's figure out later why the prime-grade beef disappeared. It's like a game of who stole it, isn't it? Let's take our time to find it since it was quite expensive." It was as if she was saying we would wait for someone to confess. The missing prime-grade beef. The whole family was now paying attention. Amidst this, my mother suddenly changed the topic. "Well, we are a close family after all. There's no need to prepare anything special. Margaret, just serve what you normally eat." "Wait a minute." My mother-in-law's face twitched. My mother waved her hand dismissively, saying there was no need for concern. "No, it's fine. I was planning to have my daughter cook the prime-grade beef anyway. We don't want to trouble anyone else, so I'll have my daughter prepare it. Just what she always eats, the usual." "The usual?" My mother-in-law repeated, almost growling. "Yes, the usual." My mother pressed again, emphasizing the usual 3 times. "Oh, I see what she's getting at." I walked over to the fridge and took out a Tupperware container. Then I put it in the microwave for 3 minutes. As the container spun around in the microwave, I made up my mind. I had to stand up for myself, just like my mother had. I myself have to do my best. I made a decision as I watched the container spinning in the microwave. "This is what I usually eat." I handed the container to my mother. "This is, well, relatives peering into it, raising a clamor akin to a scream. How awful! Is this food? Cat food? Voices rose. Sloppy rice, smashed tofu fragments, radish roots, all mixed into a mushy mess of rice. What is this? To feed my child something like this? My mother exclaimed angrily. Overlapping this voice was another. That's not okay. Even angrier, it was my husband's voice. Summoning up my courage, I responded. Mom said we should eat this during the winter. She told me to eat leftovers. She said it's a long-standing tradition in the Shaw family. Huh? But when I'm here, you eat regular meals, don't you? When you're around, we eat, and when you're not, it's leftover porridge. That's ridiculous. Mom, what are you talking about? Sawyer's tone gets even louder. My mother-in-law responds incoherently. Stop pretending you don't understand. I've never heard of such a thing. And I've never seen you, Mom, eat porridge even once since I was a kid. My husband's shouting grows louder and louder. Among the otherwise silent relatives, one person remained completely calm. Well, when you put it that way. My mother-in-law's sister spoke from the side. Sis, during the winter when your husband was away, you used to say how refreshing it was without him around, didn't you? You even ordered things like lobsters. Wait a second, lobsters? Lobsters? The whole room echoed with lobsters? You eat lobsters by yourself, but then talk about traditions and feed my daughter garbage like this? What kind of new lifestyle is that? Mom mocked, her tone dripping with sarcasm. This is. My mother-in-law stuttered in response. Meanwhile, the focus of my husband's anger shifted slightly. Wait a minute. What about Dad while I was away? Didn't try to stop it? This kind of thing? I was eating food. No, that. I'm asking, why didn't you object to Margaret being forced to eat this kind of food? Thunk. The table was hit by my husband, causing the water in a nearby glass to ripple. My father-in-law looked down and muttered weakly, I was scared. If I defended Margaret, I would be unplugged from the TV. Come to think of it, my father-in-law, like most grandpas, would always watch TV in the room after meals. But being unable to watch TV scared him. I can always set it up for you, I spoke up, and about the meat. At this point, I decided to expose everything thoroughly, so I dragged the garbage bin into the living room and opened it wide. The lid of the garbage bin was opened along with a foul smell, and on top of it all, there was marbled meat. It's too early for you to have prime-grade beef, she said, and threw away the meat. Marbled meat sitting atop the garbage pile. It had more impact than I had imagined once it came into view. Both my husband and father-in-law were wide-eyed and speechless. Seeing this, my mother dramatically writhed and exclaimed, Oh no, my meat! I brought it because I can't eat fish due to my fish allergy, and I was going to share the leftovers with my daughter to feed the baby. My mother also feels empty. She deliberately collapsed in tears. Or rather, she pretended to break down in tears. That's terrible. The relatives screamed when they saw the smelly trash and expensive beef thrown together, feeling sorry for the daughter-in-law who was often mistreated. Wait a minute. In that case, then it'll seem like I'm bullying my daughter-in-law. My mother-in-law shouted and stepped forward in front of the relatives. At that moment, I raised my voice. Mom, you're walking more than 5 steps ahead of Dad. My mother promptly interjected. Huh? What are you talking about? I responded. Don't walk in front of your husband. Walk 3 steps behind your husband. Don't walk in front of your mother. Walk 5 steps behind her. That's what I've always done. Mom always says this. That's because it's tradition. My husband now came forward. No. That can't be a tradition. Sawyer raised his voice. But Mom, didn't you always make Dad carry the groceries when you went shopping? He was usually the one walking 3 steps behind you, Mom, wasn't he? as if remembering everyone nodded in agreement.
Even the souvenirs. It was always your husband who ended up carrying them.
Whispers like these were heard here and there. It seems the arrogant behavior of my mother-in-law was quite famous even among the relatives. So does that mean you've been setting up new rules quite a lot in the Shaw household? My mom stood up abruptly in front of my mother-in-law. Well, what's wrong with that? My mother-in-law retorted confidently to my mom. Is this what you call bluffing? My mother-in-law continued speaking. After all, since we took in Margaret as a daughter-in-law, she should follow my lead. Huh. My mother interrupted with a sharp tone. I never once said give her away as a bride. I said, I've decided to unite the two of them. The idea of giving and receiving brides is so outdated in this era of gender equality. With that forceful statement, my mother-in-law recoiled. It seemed clear that she was in the wrong. The atmosphere among the relatives shifted, with no one seeming to support my mother-in-law. In the midst of this, my husband spoke. He seemed to have regained some composure. It was a calm voice, but one could sense the disappointment in it. That's right, Mom. Why do you think I married Margaret? Margaret is a buyer and has a sure palate. She helped me think of sales pitches and catchphrases for my closings, and she also conducted tastings for me. The world has moved on from relying on tradition to get by, and yet, without even understanding that, you keep feeding Margaret nothing but porridge, dulling her palate. This isn't fitting for our household anymore, and more than anything else, it's your fault, Mom. And then the husband intervened between my mother and mother-in-law. To be precise, he stood up in front of his own mother more than in front of my mother. I can't forgive doing such things behind my back. If someone was bullying my wife or trying to dull her senses with leftovers, it's obstruction of business. And finally, my husband said to me and my mother, I'm sorry. Next time, I'll treat you and Mom to some prime-grade filet mignon. I want you to enjoy it to the fullest, and also have a wine tasting at that time. My mom responded, I won't settle for anything less than the meat I bought today. She laughed. In the end, my mother-in-law was kicked out of the house. To be precise, it was cutting ties from my husband. My father-in-law would be pleased if we added Netflix. He suddenly got hooked on Korean dramas and started learning Korean. I sometimes wonder what triggers finding a purpose in life. I took photos of the winter wine brewing process and started a website and blog. I wonder if the daily efforts are visible, and I also crafted the product descriptions. Both existing in-store sales and online sales increased, and the business expanded smoothly. Today, my husband invited my mother and me to a hotel restaurant to thank us again. At the meeting place, I opened my smartphone, looked at the screen, and spoke to my husband. Hey, Mom says she wants to have carpaccio and lobster because she wants to post it on Instagram. My husband burst out laughing. I thought your mom was allergic to fish. And lobsters, huh? Too funny. I have a stomachache. I burst out laughing, too, at the meeting point. Where did your fish allergy go, Mom?